Okay, just a short video about using VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, inside LibreOffice or OpenOffice spreadsheets. This is an example of a spreadsheet that I did which generates Gcode in a text file on the desktop. Oh, okay, I've just pressed the button and it takes these numbers, generates a text file on the desktop, like that. Watch. And there's my text file, and if I open the text file, there it is. Get my cursor back, and my VBA script has generated this leveling Gcode from these input parameters, and it's a very useful thing to be able to do. I could also write parameters back into the cells of the spreadsheet, and so I thought I'd just quickly whiz through a quick tutorial showing how to actually make VBA macros, which basically can access the contents of cells, modify them, write them back to the cells, and also write to text files. Okay, so I'm going to try to go through the basics of how to do a spreadsheet with macros. Now, the first thing we do is make a spreadsheet. There's a new spreadsheet. And let's put some stuff into the spreadsheet so that we can then process it. Let's put some text in a cell. Now that cell is actually coordinate 0, 0. And let's put some values in, for example down here. Value A equals, and put a value over here somewhere, give it a value. Just pick an arbitrary value, value B over here. And put another value here. There's a big number. Okay, so we have some numbers. Let's colour them in and give them something so they stand out. We're going to process these with our macro in a minute or two, hopefully. So let's make those stand out. And we'll make them nice and big so we can see them. There we go. There we go. So we have a spreadsheet, and I quite like to do some things with these numbers in my macro. Now, first of all, we have to make a macro. So we go to Tools, Macros, and Organize Macros, and we're going to do our macro in Basic. And this is spreadsheet untitled 2. So this is where we tell it that we're going to have a new macro under spreadsheet untitled 2, and we'll call it YT demo for YouTube demo. Say OK, and oh, it's on another monitor. On the other monitor, it has opened up the window. And this is the window in which we can place our basic code. Now we need to make some code to access the contents of these cells over here. And what I'm going to do is to actually copy and paste into this window the code that I've already written and tested, which would be a very quick way of proceeding. So I'm going to open the code in an editor over here and copy it into this window so we can proceed with haste, and then talk you through it. And there's our code, and there's not much of it. There's very little code involved, and I will talk you through this in great detail. So basically, to start our program, we need to define a few variables, and the variables that we will define are objects. And the objects are required because they are links. They are the links that allow us access to the spreadsheet itself. We are going to call the first one CurrDoc for current document, and then there's CurrSheet for current sheet, and then we have CurrCell for current cell. And I've also chosen to declare a string for the save file name, for the name of the file name where we're going to stick our output. This was repurposed code from my Gcode generator program. And then we need to initialize some variables, and what we do is we use this magic statement here, which is to set the current document to this component. It's just a magic phrase that you pick out of the ether and stick it on your program. Then we want to point the current sheet to the current document and use the method sheets0. And I believe that sheets0 refers it to element 0 of the array of sheets down here. That's called sheet 1, but it's the 0th sheet, and the next sheet along would be the element number 1 out of 0 and 1, etc. So that points it to this sheet here. And then what we can do is here we're going to look for the contents of coordinate 0, 0 and take the contents of the cell at 0, 0, and we're referencing it by position. So this takes our object current doc and it points it to the current sheet by position, and the position we tell it to use is 0, 0. So that is then a pointer to this sheet. And then the next command that we use is to bring up a message box, and we tell it to display the string which is representing the contents of the current cell. So that should bring up a message box containing that string, text in coordinate 0, 0. And there it is. I'm going to press, can I press stop? It won't let me because I've done that. Press stop. Now, the next thing in the program is we are going to access the contents of some more cells, for example up here. Now, the current cell, we're going to point the current cell object to another cell, and this time by position 1, 2. And position 1, 2 is actually cell B3, so it's 0, 1 x coordinate, 0, 1, 2 is cell B3, as I've shown in the comment here. So this sets current cell to the contents, it sets current cell to point to cell B3. And then this takes the variable, gets the variable value A, and it assigns it the value of the cell which is pointed to by the object current cell, which we've said is cell B3. So that takes that number and stuffs it into the variable value A. And then here we take that value multiplied by -1, and then here you see the same thing as we had up here. That takes the object current cell and gets its value and assigns that variable back to it. So here we've taken the value out of the cell, changed its value by multiplying it by -1, and then we write it back. And if I run that macro again, you should see each time that I run the macro, the sign changes on the cell over here. And you'll also see something happening to the box down here. the value of that is getting smaller each time. And the reason for that is because the next thing that we do is we call that value B, and we get the value of that cell by using the get cell by position, using the values 1 and 4, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's column 0, 1, so that's cell 1, 4. And here we're multiplying it by 0.95 each time, so it's going down by 5% each time that I run this script. And then we write the value back into that cell. So that's a very quick example of accessing cells and changing their value, and you can get as complicated as you like with that. And finally, the next thing that we do is to use some of these values and do something with them and write them to a text file. And a text file has actually been appearing on my desktop each time I've run this. Look, this one, output from ytdemo.txt, and there is the string in a file. There is the file name in a string. So I declared a string, and I wrote the file name and path into it, and that has enabled me with this open command to create a text file on my desktop. Once I'd created the file with the open command, I opened it as file number 1, and then when I print to file number 1, I can then print various things to it. Here, this is a text string in quotes that gets written out to it. Here I wrote my value, which is a variable, which I set. My value is a variable, and I set that equal to value B, which was from the cell on my spreadsheet over here. There's value B. There. I write that in. I divide it by 3 so that it's a more interesting number. And then I write it out to the text file with a string saying value B over 3 unformatted equals. And then I write that value on that same line. Then on the following line, I print out the following. I print out value B over 3 formatted equals, and then I use a formatting string to print out my value again. Look, it's the same variable, but we're using a format string, which is in the form hash 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 naught point naught naught. So that will print up to 5 digits in front of the decimal point, and then 2 digits after the decimal point. And if the value is 0, it will print 0.00 for the output. And finally, I close the file. So if I open this file and drag the editor from the other monitor onto this monitor, then you'll see that the contents of the text file it created was in fact that. And so, unformatted, the number created was quite unwieldy. And if, for example, you're doing maths in your script and writing numbers out to a text file for a purpose such as, for example, making Gcode, then you might not want 8 decimal places of precision. 2 might be entirely fine for when you're writing in millimeters in Gcode. So the formatting string is very useful. So that's just about it, except what you've seen here isn't the entire story, because I'd quite like a button on the form so I can just press a button and run my script. So I need to add a toolbar to my sheet. So to add the toolbar, we go to View, Toolbars, excuse me. We go to View, Toolbars, Tools, and we get a new toolbar up, and there's a very important one which is controls, one of which is button, push button, and with that I can draw a button. I'm going to change the properties of this push button. I think we can change its name, its label. The label's what we care about. Push button 1 we can leave as it is, but the label we want to be do the thing. And yeah, so that's our button. That would probably be a far more interesting label that we would give it. But far more important than that is we want to tell it what to do when we press the button. And what we want to do is to tell it to run a macro. Now, you will see this warning telling you to make sure you've got the 64-bit Java runtime environment enabled. And when I first did this, I went off to the internet and downloaded it and installed it. But it was already installed. So, yeah, you can't simply say OK. And now we're going to navigate to our macro and tell it that that's the macro that we want to run. And say OK. Now, this button won't work just yet. If I click on this button, nothing happens because we are still in edit mode. We need to go into design mode by clicking on this icon which has got the set square and the pen. Now we're in run mode, and each time we click on the button it runs the macro and generates a text file on the desktop and runs my macro. Now we're not quite finished because we are very nearly finished, but you have to change one more thing, which is the security to enable your macros to be run when you load them back in. Because you would want to save this as untitled2, and once you've loaded it back in, you'll want to be able to run it, because the security is by default set such that it will not run your macros. It will give you a warning, and the warning will tell you to go into Tools, Options, and set your security accordingly. So we shall do that now. Here's Tools, go to Options, we have to go to LibreOffice Security, Macro Security, click on that, and that is my recommended setting. Basically, you are considered to be an untrusted source because you wrote your macro, and yeah, they just don't trust you. So you say medium and you say OK, apply, OK, and then when you load this macro back in, it will prompt you that it contains a macro which is disabled unless you say yes please, and you say yes please, and then it will run your macro if you click on your button. So the macro is enabled after you agree for the macros to be enabled, and otherwise macros are disabled. So there you go. That's how you can have VBA macros embedded inside of spreadsheets, and that's exactly the same technique I used to, let's have a look at my edit macros, to do my Gcode generator, which I used for generating a bunch of Gcode to do saw cuts in an inclined plane, which I was working on my CNC. And I think I've got another one around here somewhere, which recent documents, sheets macros, I think that might be it. What's it doing? Have I crashed it? Oh, so this is what happens when you have set the security. It tells you that you might have viruses and you tell it to enable macros. So here's my macro again, shown that before. And if I go into macros, edit macros, where have I hidden it? And there is the macro that generates that Gcode, which is basically a whole bunch of variables extracted from the spreadsheet, and then a whole bunch of checking to make sure that the variables are sensible values before I unleash hell upon my text file, and then some simple loops to run through round and round, generating text file by sending Gcode to a text file, and lots of format statements. So that's just about it. It's the end of my tutorial. There you go. I hope it's been of some use to you. Good luck and have fun. Oh, and the other thing is you can stick images on spreadsheets, so it's a nice way of documenting your programs with simple diagrams if you need to. Okay, have fun.